My sister slept with my fiancé and mocked me for years, but at my mother's funeral I gave that despicable couple the most miserable ending imaginable. My name is Chloe Anderson, and I'm 37 years old. For the past 6 years I haven't seen my sister Vanessa, the woman who stole the man I once planned to call my husband. And yet, this morning I stood inside a funeral home in Portland, staring at the main door, bracing for that fateful moment when she would walk in. My mother had always hoped the two of us could reconcile, but as time passed, all she could do was pray in silence. I still remember that autumn morning when she passed gently without a word of blame. In her final moment, she whispered, "Chloe, if you could forgive." And I nodded. Not because I forgave, but because I knew she needed peace. The funeral was held at a small chapel on the west side of the city, the place she used to attend every Sunday. I stood beside my father, my hand gently gripping his arm as it trembled with emotion. He had aged so much since the last time I visited 3 Christmases ago, when my mother could still bake pies and make iced coffee for me by hand. He didn't say a word, but I knew he was waiting for Vanessa too. Neither of them had truly spoken since everything fell apart. In fact, no one in my family had mentioned that name since the day Jake Evans, the man who once proposed to me with a sapphire ring under candlelight, called off the engagement. 3 weeks later, he appeared on Vanessa's Instagram, hand in hand, smiling like he'd never shattered anyone's heart. I thought I was going to lose my mind. I used to wake up in the middle of the night drenched in sweat, crying on the kitchen floor because everything I had built with Jake had become someone else's trophy. But then I left Portland. I moved to Seattle, cut all contact, and started over. 6 years, long enough to become someone else, a woman who stood on her own, steady, and learned how to rise from a fall, especially when caused by her own family. And yet, this morning, when I saw Vanessa Hayes printed on the guest list prepared by the funeral home, my chest tightened. When the door opened and the October wind slipped through the gap, I didn't have to turn to know they had arrived. The entire room fell silent for a few seconds. Subtle glances shifted to the back. I turned around slowly, calmly, even surprising myself. Vanessa walked in wearing a fitted black dress, makeup flawless, so perfect that not even a tear could ruin that foundation. Beside her, Jake, now her husband, wore a gray suit, his face slightly pale when his eyes landed on me. I looked directly at them. I didn't smile. I didn't nod. I said no. Vanessa saw me first. She froze. For a moment her eyes widened, her breath caught. Jake followed her gaze, and when he saw me, his whole body stiffened. And I tilted my head slightly, like I was evaluating a bad sketch someone was trying to pass off as art. I leaned toward my father and said softly, "I'll sit in the front row with you. Anyone who wants to perform righteousness can do it from the back." He didn't say anything, just gave a quiet nod. The room was small, but the air felt like stone pressing down, and I knew the play hadn't started, but someone had already lost the leading role. Before everything collapsed, I used to think I was the luckiest woman in the world. Back then, I was 31, head of communications at an organic food company in Denver. The job was intense, sometimes suffocatingly so, but I loved it. I was involved in everything, from campaign building to meeting international partners. Creativity kept me alive, and I believed love was something I didn't need to rush. My mother, Lorraine, used to call every night. Eating dinner alone again, she'd gently scold over the phone, a hint of worry in her voice. "As long as you find someone truly good, I'll be at peace." I'd usually laugh it off, though. Deep down, I wanted that too. I just never expected that the man I thought was truly good would be the one to drag our entire family through hell. I met Jake Evans at a food tech conference in Santa Fe. He was a guest of my old classmate, Heather, who had once led our senior project group and now worked in venture capital. Jake stood out, not just because of his classic good looks, but his calm presence, confidence, and the way he listened as if no other world existed. That evening, we went out for dinner with a group of friends. Jake sat across from me, telling stories about building a supply chain tech startup for agriculture. He was funny, humble, and incredibly smart. I remember thinking, a guy like him, if he's genuine, only exists in novels. But Jake wasn't just genuine, he was intentional. After dinner, he asked for my number. We texted every night for 2 weeks. When I returned to Denver, he sent me a small package. Inside was a book I had mentioned only once, along with a handwritten note, "I want to understand you better." From there, everything felt like a film. Dinners at charming European-style bistros, hiking trips, nights with jazz music at his apartment in Boulder. Jake welcomed me into his world, structured, quiet, yet warm. After 17 months, on my birthday, Jake arranged a private dinner on Lookout Mountain with a view of the city sparkling below. When fireworks suddenly exploded in the sky, he dropped to one knee, pulled out a vintage emerald ring from a small box. I didn't hesitate. I loved him, and I believed he loved me. My mother nearly cried when I told her. "Chloe, I was so worried you'd get too caught up in work and miss the most beautiful things. I'm so happy you found it." She hugged me tightly in the little kitchen where she always baked apple pies when fall arrived. Then came the months of wedding planning, filled with excitement from both families. I didn't want anything too extravagant, but Jake said, "We only marry once. You deserve the best." So, we booked a boutique hotel in Estes Park, made a list of 100 guests, and chose live music instead of a DJ. I chose Vanessa to be my maid of honor. Even though we hadn't been close growing up, my mother always hoped we'd reconnect. "Let the wedding be a place of healing," she said. I nodded. I believed I was mature enough not to get pulled into old childhood rivalries. Vanessa seemed surprised when I asked, but she smiled. "Of course, I'm so happy you found love." When I introduced Jake to Vanessa at a family dinner, I didn't think much of it. She complimented his charm, asked about his company, then quietly looked at me with a strange expression. I thought it was jealousy. Vanessa had always been competitive, but this time I was too naive. While I coordinated plans with my mother and the wedding planner, Vanessa jumped in to help, picking flowers, ordering the cake, even meeting with a photographer for me on busy days. "I just want you to have the perfect day," she said, and I believed her. I had no idea that while I was picking out a wedding veil, my sister was picking a way to destroy my entire life. I started noticing something was off about 3 months before the wedding. Jake had been busy, very busy. He used to be the one who made plans, reserved tables, mapped out our weekends, but now he frequently canceled last minute, citing board meetings, investor calls, or technical issues at the company. His texts remained polite, but lacked the warmth I'd grown used to. And when we did meet, Jake wasn't really there, at least not emotionally. I once told a long, ridiculous story about a difficult client at work, something that would have made him laugh before, but he only gave a faint smile while scrolling on his phone. I sat there feeling like I was talking to a stranger. I kept making excuses for him. All couples go through pre-wedding stress, right? Maybe financial pressure and packed schedules were wearing him down. That's what I told my mom when she asked, "Are you sure Jake is still the same man you fell for?" I laughed, hiding the unease growing inside me. "He's just stressed about the wedding, Mom." But I couldn't ignore the coldness in his touch, the way Jake avoided my eyes whenever I asked about the honeymoon plans. And I couldn't help noticing that as he pulled away, Vanessa seemed to appear more and more. She started calling me, sending wedding flower ideas, photography venues, even a detailed expense spreadsheet like a real wedding planner. My mother was surprised by her sudden enthusiasm. As for me, I found it strange. One evening, I had a meeting that ran late into the night. When I stepped out of the office, I saw a text from Vanessa. "Jake and I just discussed the cake design a bit more. Check your email." I froze for a few seconds. Just discussed with Jake. Why hadn't anyone told me? I called Jake right away. He answered in an even tone. Vanessa stopped by my office to pick up the flower sheet, and we chatted for a bit. "That's all. Don't read too much into it." It said nothing. Something in his voice unsettled me. It wasn't blatantly dishonest, but it felt too polished, like he'd rehearsed the line. 2 weeks later, while cleaning out Jake's car for an upcoming camping trip with friends, I found a small silver bracelet under the passenger seat. A simple charm bracelet with a light purple gemstone, the kind Vanessa used to wear. I'd seen her with one just like it back in college. I picked it up, my heart pounding. Even then, I didn't want to believe the worst. Maybe she left it there by accident. Maybe it meant nothing. That night, I held up the bracelet in front of Jake. "Whose is this?" Jake glanced at it and replied without hesitation. "Probably Vanessa's. I gave her a ride to the photo studio the other day. She said she was running late and her car was in the shop. You didn't mention that to me." Jake shrugged. It wasn't a big deal. Nothing to bring up. I nodded, pretending to believe him. But from that moment on, scattered details started piecing together in my mind like a cruel puzzle. Jake secretly checking his phone. The looks Vanessa gave him at family dinners. No longer the gaze of a sister-in-law. And once, when they went to pick out flowers, she'd posted a blurry story on Instagram. I hadn't paid attention back then, but now I remembered. The reflection in the glass wasn't the stylist. It was Jake. I told my mother about the bracelet. She stayed quiet for a few seconds, then placed her hand on my shoulder. "Stay clear-headed, Chloe. Don't let things fall apart before you're certain. but don't shut your eyes when everything is becoming clear. That night, I went to bed with a storm in my chest. I didn't want to believe it. I couldn't believe it, but I was starting to see that something was rotting beneath the surface, and if I did nothing, it would explode right in the middle of my own wedding. I don't remember exactly what made me decide to go to Jake's office that morning. Maybe it was instinct, or maybe it was the quiet collapse of trust that had built up over the past few weeks. All I knew was that as I stood in front of the glass building where his company was located, 6th floor, end of the left hallway, my hands were gripping a paper bag holding 2 sandwiches and 2 cups of hot coffee, which I had waited in line nearly 10 minutes to buy. I used to do this all the time, surprise him with breakfast, then sit in that familiar leather chair in his office, listening to Jake talk about the deals he was working on. But today was different, not because I was nervous, but because I no longer held hope. The receptionist greeted me with her usual smile. "Good morning, Miss Chloe. Mr. Jake is in a meeting. Would you like to wait?" I nodded but didn't sit. I said softly, "I'll just drop off his breakfast real quick and come right back down." The receptionist hesitated. He mentioned not wanting to be disturbed." I looked her straight in the eyes. "Then I'll just leave it on the desk. I doubt that'll be too disruptive." Before she could reply, I walked briskly to the elevator. My heart thudded in my chest like my body was trying to warn me, "Don't do this. Don't see what you can't unsee." But I was already there. Jake's office was tucked away, its frosted glass walls blocking most of the view. I stepped closer, about to knock, then stopped. Through the frosted pane, I saw 2 figures standing very close to each other. A tall man with familiar brown hair and the other, blonde hair tied in a bun and a lavender dress. It was Vanessa. I couldn't hear anything, but I saw Jake lean down, his hand resting on her waist. And then, like an old reflex, I pushed the door open. They both spun around. Jake hadn't even moved his hand yet, and Vanessa, her hand was still on his chest. Her face went pale, not with shame, but because she'd been caught. I set the paper bag on a chair. "Don't stop," I said. My voice wasn't shaking like I thought it would. I didn't mean to interrupt. Jake stepped back half a pace, adjusting his collar, avoiding my gaze. "Chloe, let me explain." I looked at them both slowly, like I was staring at a distorted photograph. "How long has it been?" Vanessa swallowed hard. "Since after the engagement party," she whispered. I let out a laugh, dry and sharp, stabbing my own chest. "Honestly, I asked just to confirm. I already knew." Jake stepped toward me. "It's not what you think. We didn't mean for it to happen." "Don't." I stepped back. "Don't give me the tired lines. Did either of you ever consider that I was the only person who didn't know I was being betrayed in my own life?" No one answered. The room was suffocatingly quiet. I slipped off my engagement ring and placed it gently on the wooden desk. "You two are a perfect match, a skilled liar and a talented actress." Vanessa didn't look at me. She turned, grabbed her purse, and rushed out of the room. Jake called after her, "Vanessa, wait! She chose you," I cut in, "and I choose myself." I walked out of the office feeling like my whole body was splintering, but strangely, I didn't cry. It wasn't until I got home, in that quiet apartment, that I collapsed to the floor. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even know who I was anymore. From a woman about to get married, ready to begin a new chapter, I had become a ghost, left behind with 100 broken pieces that wouldn't fit back together. I quit my job a week later. I couldn't pitch campaign strategies while my mind kept replaying the image of Jake and my sister wrapped in each other's arms in that office. I wasn't eating, I wasn't sleeping, and I knew if I stayed in Denver, I would drown in that pain. I booked a one-way ticket to Minneapolis where the parent company was opening a new branch. I told no one. I sent my mother one line, "I need to leave. I'll be okay, but I can't be near Vanessa right now." She didn't call. She only replied, "I understand. And I'll always be here." I left Denver on a cold afternoon, carrying just 2 suitcases and a promise to myself. I would never let anyone destroy me again. Minneapolis in March was bitter cold. Snow still clung to rooftops, sidewalks frozen in chalky white patches, and the wind swept through long streets, making it impossible to stand still for too long. And yet, somehow that cold cleared my mind. I started over in a small office on the 8th floor of a glass building along Hennepin Avenue. My new role was Internal Communications Project Supervisor. Not as creatively demanding as before, but just enough to keep me busy without burning out. The CO workers were kind, the office was calm, and no one knew I was the girl whose fiancé was stolen by her sister. That was exactly what I needed. anonymity and the chance to begin again. I rented a studio apartment near BD Makaska Lake, where every morning I could see sunlight glinting off the water through the rare northern light. I made my own coffee each morning, learned to cook simple meals, and started meditating using a phone app I used to mock. Then I met Eleanor Chen, head of human resources, the first person who brought me to a small monthly book group at Moonflower Bookstore. We didn't talk much about our personal lives, but there was a quiet gentleness about Eleanor that needed no explanation. It was she who later introduced me to Julian Foster. Julian was a guest speaker at an internal seminar on sustainable investing, and we happened to sit next to each other during the lunch break. He was tall, simply dressed, but his eyes were sharp and steady. When I joked about skipping breakfast to handle 3 urgent emails, he smiled and said, "Then I guess I get to be the first one to say good morning with a sandwich." We started with after-work lunches, talking about books, documentaries, and creative ad campaigns we both admired. Julian wasn't pushy, never imposed, and never once asked about my past. I used to think good men only existed in fiction, but with Julian, kindness came in the form of remembering I didn't drink coffee after 6 p.m., taking a step back whenever I hesitated, and never forcing me to speak until I was ready. 3 months later, on a lightly snowy night, I sat on my balcony wrapped in a thick wool blanket with him. For the first time, I told everything. About Jake, about Vanessa, about the shock that shattered both my love and self-trust. Julian didn't interrupt. When I finished, he just gently held my hand and said, "I once lost half my company to a close friend. Believe me, betrayal doesn't pick favorites." I don't know exactly when we fell in love. One day I just realized I no longer felt a knot in my throat every time the doorbell rang. That I looked forward to our dates, not because I feared loneliness, but because I felt safe beside him. 1 year later, Julian proposed in a snow-covered garden in Lindale Rose Park, where he had quietly buried a small box containing the ring, so I could discover it on our usual weekend walk. The ring wasn't a diamond. It was a pale blue opal set between 2 small amethysts, symbolizing something delicate yet radiant when cared for the right way. We had a small wedding with just over 20 guests in an artsy cafe with a loft space. Fresh flowers we picked ourselves, and my favorite cake from the bakery down the street. No extravagant dress, no big stage, just soft acoustic guitar and vows spoken from the heart. My mother came sitting in the front row holding my hand as I read my vows. My father couldn't attend due to his health, but he called me that morning, his voice trembling. "Chloe, today you start the rest of your life with someone who deserves you. Be truly happy." And I have been happy, simple, and no longer hiding old wounds like they were something shameful. We bought a small house with a backyard where I grew strawberries and Julian built bookshelves by hand. I went to work regularly, drank tea instead of coffee, and every time I walked through the door, I knew I no longer had to keep anything to myself. My mother, Lorraine Anderson, passed away on an autumn morning before the leaves had time to change. Late-stage liver cancer took her quickly in just a few months. Though the doctors had warned us early on, I still wasn't prepared for the moment she let go. Julian and I flew to Portland that same afternoon. On the plane, I gripped my husband's hand tightly, trying to calm the wave of dread every time I imagined facing Vanessa. It had been 6 years since I left, and I hadn't spoken to her since. What I knew of their lives came secondhand from my mother, that they married a year after I left, that Jake was now CEO of a small private company, that Vanessa loved flaunting her luxury vacations online. But I wasn't returning for the past. I came for my mother, the last thread connecting me to this family. The service was held at the same chapel where my mother used to sing in the choir. When I walked in with Julian, holding my father's hand, all eyes turned. Most were filled with sympathy, but then I heard the murmurs as 2 people entered right after us. Vanessa and Jake. She wore a designer black dress with an unnecessarily deep neckline, her hair curled, lips painted red like she was attending a movie premiere. Jake still looked sharp, but noticeably thinner. Tired, he held Vanessa's hand loosely, his gaze briefly meeting mine before quickly turning away. Vanessa smiled when she saw me, then spoke loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "I'm honestly surprised. Chloe's still single at this age." "Huh? That's some resilience." I turned and gave a slight smile. "I'm surprised you still fit into a size 4 after all these years of pretending." She stiffened for a brief second. Jake rolled his eyes, and Julian gently squeezed my hand as if to remind me she's not worth it. "Oh, I almost forgot," I said, turning to my husband. "Julian, this is your sister-in-law, Vanessa Hayes." Julian stepped forward and politely extended a hand. "Nice to see you again, Vanessa." Vanessa blinked, then blinked again. "Again? We met at the tech investment event in San Diego 2016. You were with Jake. I was the rep from the fund that made Jake's company lose that $1 million deal at the last minute. Jake looked up, face turning pale. Julian Foster? Yes, Foster Capital. The air around us seemed to thicken. Jake cleared his throat and stepped back. Vanessa looked at Julian, then at me, like she was trying to stitch together forgotten fragments. I said nothing more. I simply linked my arm with Julian's and walked to the front row where my father was waiting. There was no smugness in my chest, only relief. No shouting, no reclaiming anyone. Just showing up with the right man was enough. The service was quiet. I gave the eulogy, telling stories of how my mother used to gently knock on my door in the mornings, how she made chamomile tea when I couldn't sleep, how she hugged me the last time I left Portland. No scolding, just a simple, live the rest of your life in a way that lets you hold your head high. As I stepped down, Vanessa unexpectedly walked up. She held the mic, her hand slightly shaking. Mom used to tell me that people who hurt others don't always win. She said, there comes a day when you look in the mirror and realize what you've really lost. Today, I think I understand now. I looked up at her. For the first time in 6 years, I didn't see triumph in Vanessa's eyes, only exhaustion and sadness, poorly hidden. Later, in the garden behind my father's house, where we held a small farewell, I caught Jake's gaze again. But this time, he was the one who looked away first. Julian came over and handed me a cup of hot tea. Your mom would be so proud. I nodded, eyes drifting to the gray sky between bare trees. I hadn't come to take anything back. I came to say goodbye to the woman who loved me with her whole heart, and to show myself that what I chose was right. The next afternoon, while I was sorting through some of my mother's old boxes, the doorbell rang. I glanced through the curtain by the hallway window. It was Vanessa. She stood alone, arms crossed, no makeup, no fancy coat, just a loose gray sweater and faded jeans. I opened the door without a word. She looked up at me, eyes red like she'd cried all night. Can I come in? I stepped aside. Vanessa walked past me as if entering a place both foreign and painful. In the kitchen, I made 2 cups of tea, no sugar, no milk. I knew exactly how she liked it, but I didn't ask. Setting one in front of her, I sat down across the table and waited. It took a long while before Vanessa spoke, her voice low. I left the house this morning. Jake doesn't know where I am, and I don't want him to know. I tightened my grip on the teacup handle, steadying myself. So, when did it start? Vanessa didn't answer that question right away. Instead, she looked around the kitchen, the place where our mother used to teach us how to bake cookies every winter, where she'd scold us for spilling flour on the floor and then laugh when she saw us shaping the dough into little hearts. I hated this kitchen as a kid, she said softly, because Mom always let you do the important stuff. I was just the one cracking the eggs. I said nothing. Vanessa continued, this time with no defenses. I don't know where to begin, or more honestly, I don't know how to make you believe that I mean this. Then don't try to make me believe. Just say it. How I hear it, that's up to me. She nodded, raising her eyes to meet mine. For the first time, those eyes held no sharpness, no challenge, only exhaustion and shame. Jake, he's not who I thought he was. At first, everything felt like a fairy tale. Traveling, parties, press mentions, admiration from friends. But then the debt started piling up. He was always reckless with money, using mine, his family's, then borrowing from banks. Every time something failed, Jake blamed everything except himself. I remember Jake's impulsive moments, the way he'd frown at anyone who disagreed with him. I once thought it was part of being a bold entrepreneur, but hearing it now in Vanessa's voice, I saw what it truly was: control. He checked my phone every night, tracked my credit cards, FaceTimed randomly just to see where I was. I once left the house in the middle of the night because I didn't reply to a text within 10 minutes. Then why didn't you leave? I asked, trying to hide the bitterness in my voice. I was ashamed, she whispered. I took him from you. I couldn't let the world see I destroyed a family just to end up in a gilded cage. Vanessa buried her face in her hands, tears flowing uncontrollably. To ruin everything. Not just your life, our whole family. Mom once said, you might win someone else's game, but you'll lose yourself if you play it the wrong way. I didn't get it back then, but I do now. I sat still. No comforting, no sympathetic words, but I didn't turn away. I'm leaving Jake. I'm working with a lawyer. The prenup doesn't give me much, but I don't care anymore. I just want to live again without pretending. A long silence followed. I'm not asking you to forgive me, Vanessa said, voice tightening. I just need you to know that I understand what I've done, and I'll carry it. I looked at her. In that moment, I no longer saw the arrogant girl who once gloated about stealing my fiancé. I saw a woman broken, and in her eyes a remorse that felt real. "Mom kept every card you sent," she whispered, "wrapped them in a box. Even the letter you wrote her your first year in Minneapolis. I read them all last night. I didn't expect you'd still have that much kindness in you after everything." I stood and poured more hot water into the teapot. "I'm not who I used to be, Vanessa, but I don't want hatred to wear me down." I handed her a fresh cup of tea, no sugar, no milk, but this time I added a slice of lemon, the thing she used to love as a child. Vanessa smiled through her tears. No one said the word forgiveness, but in the way we looked at each other, something softened. A small step, but the first, toward a path no longer called the past. I returned to Minneapolis on an early winter morning, snow gently blanketing the airport windowsill. Julian met me at arrivals, pulling me into a long hug, as if afraid that if he let go I'd disappear back into some painful memory. But I wasn't the woman who had once left Portland with a shattered heart and eyes avoiding the past. I had gone. I had returned. I had faced it, and I had moved through it. 3 weeks later, life had settled back into its rhythm when I noticed my period was late. A week passed, then another. I tried not to overthink it, but Julian was the first to speak up. "Maybe we should take a test," he asked gently, as if afraid to break a fragile hope growing inside me. When the 2 pink lines appeared, my hands trembled, not from fear but from disbelief, because for so many years I thought this would never happen to me. I sat down on the bathroom floor, holding my belly while Julian knelt beside me, whispering, "We're going to be a family. You know that?" I didn't answer. I just nodded as tears quietly streamed down my cheeks. The news of my pregnancy made my father cry during our video call. "If your mother knew, she'd probably throw a party," he said, voice choked with emotion. I thought of her, of the little card she once wrote, saying all she ever wished was for me to be truly happy. I believed she knew. And Vanessa, she still lives in Portland. After the funeral, she filed for divorce, moved out of the 3-story house, and rented a 2-bedroom apartment near the place Mom used to teach piano. She found a marketing job at an independent bookstore. Not high-paying but kind, with no one calling her Mrs. Jake Evans. We stay in touch, not close like friends, but enough to send each other a photo of Mom's favorite flowers, or a simple question like, "Are you doing okay today?" The last time we video called, I tilted the camera toward my belly, already showing a gentle curve. Vanessa didn't say anything for a few seconds. Then she laughed, a soft rasp of a laugh with no trace of old pride. "You're going to be a mom. I never thought I'd see you like this, but I'm glad I did." She smiled. "And you too. You're living your own life now, not someone else's. Mom would be proud of you." Vanessa nodded, her eyes pausing on an old photo I had framed behind me, a picture of the 3 of us from a summer long ago at Trillium Lake. She reached out and touched the screen as if trying to draw near to what once was a family. A year's end, the snow had thickly blanketed the backyard of the house Julian and I now called home. He built a small wooden shed where I could sit and read as my belly grew. I began to write again, not to escape, but to remember. I wrote down every step of healing, every person who entered and exited, every painful but worthwhile lesson. I know life won't always be gentle. There will be challenges even in motherhood. But what keeps me steady isn't that I avoided pain. It's that I learned to walk through it without losing myself. Vanessa once said during a late-night call, "You don't have to forgive me, but thank you for not choosing hate." I replied with a line our mother once told me, "Forgiveness isn't a gift for others, it's a gift we give ourselves to live lighter." And that's how I live now, lighter, freer, and more honest than I've ever been. In the tiny room Julian and I are turning into a nursery, I've hung a small wooden plaque that reads, "Where healing begins, life blooms." My story doesn't end with applause or a sweet revenge. It ends with a quiet breath, a warm embrace, and a heart wide enough to hold both old wounds and all the good that's coming. Because loss isn't the end. Sometimes it's just a pause, so we can learn to reread our lives in a different voice. My story isn't just about surviving betrayal, it's proof that pain isn't the final chapter, but the start of something stronger. I learned to let go of the past and rebuild from the simplest things, a kind husband, a small home, and the child growing inside me. Forgiveness isn't because others deserve it, but because we do. And sometimes the best things come not from what we hold on to, but from what we're brave enough to release.